Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the multi-platform service of the Unitarian Church of Staten Island. We're so thankful for all of you joining us, both in person and online. If you're joining us in person, as long as you're not up on the stage, please continue to wear masks and socially distance. And if you do so, you can feel free to belt out the hymns or songs as you wish. If you're joining us online, you can say hello to each other in the chat box. Everybody's welcome to join us for the coffee hour, those in person through those doors after the service. And please stay for the virtual coffee hour for those of you online, where you can chat after the service. I do have one announcement in your program. It says that next week's service, my Navajo family is in the sanctuary with Reverend Darrell Berger. It should read with Sarah Rachel Walters, who's here in our choir as well, and she will be leading that service next week. I think I covered everything except perhaps we gently remind you to silence your mobile devices at this time. And now let us prepare for this morning's service.
Got another verse to Rising Sun for you. I've got one foot on the platform and another foot on the train. I'm going back to New Orleans to wear the ball and chain. Yeah, so this is a lot of prison songs from Leadbelly. And it was interesting. A lot of his songs, they weren't all about prison. They weren't all about not prison. They were about both, because his life was about both. And this book is about both too, if I can find it here. The New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. It's been out a few years now. I'm sure many of you have read it, but it was really a game changer in terms of bringing to white middle class folks the connective tissue of the various institutions of racism that this society has supported for so many years, and what you might call the education prison complex. She writes, as a society, our decision to heap shame and contempt upon those who struggle and fail in a system designed to keep them locked up and locked out says far more about ourselves than it does about them.
I invite you to join me in lighting our chalice. You can find the affirmation in our order of service. We light this chalice in the search for truth and the spirit of love. We unite in worship and fellowship. And as an extension of lighting our chalice, I want to take a moment of silence to light these candles for some of the names of those who have recently been affected by police brutality. We cannot cover all of the names of those affected, but this morning we light a candle for the life of Sanquarius DeMonta Williams, for the life of Jermaine Hickson, and for the life of Kristen Pretlure. May these lights be a symbol of our commitment to continue the work of racial justice and to proclaim that Black Lives Matter.
Please start in your gray candle to number 199. Precious Lord, take my hand. Please rise and join me.
Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me on, let me stand. I am tired, I am weak, I am worn. Through the storm, through the night, Precious Lord, lead me home. Precious Lord, take my hand, lead me home, let me stand. I'm tired, I'm weak, I'm worn. Through the storm, through the night, lead me on to the light. Take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home. When the darkness appears and the night draws near, and the day is past and gone, all the rest down at my feet. Hold my hand, take my hand, precious Lord, lead me home.
Now is a time in our service for joys and sorrows. If you're visiting us for the first time, this is a time when you can introduce yourself if you'd like. For those of you gathering in person, we invite you to raise your hand and I'll come around with the microphone. You can stand and share from your seat. And we invite you to share what's in your heart. For those joining us online, please, we invite you to type into the chat your joys and sorrows. Ben will read them aloud. And we also invite you to share whatever's in your heart today. What do you have? Okay.
Hi, my name is Kathy, and I just want to let everybody know that Larry Schwabacker is back in the hospital. He had a little bit of a setback, and I have his room number if anybody wants it. I spoke to Doris Nielsen this morning. I don't know how many people, she doesn't come too often. And she lives alone. She's, I don't know, she's 83, 84, something like that. She's gotten through COVID pretty much okay. But now she's sick. She doesn't know. She went to the doctor. It's not COVID. It's some virus. And she said she's having a hard time kicking it. So I asked if she needed anything. She said no. She'd gone to the grocery store this morning. So, but if anybody has her number and wants to give her a call, see how she is, or send a card, would be nice. And happy birthday to Beatrice. A little belated.
Thanks, Kathy. We'll do Randy first and so.
Yes, I just got a call from, I'm Randy, just got a call from my cousin, my mother's sister, whom I mentioned before. She's about to turn 103. My cousin's flying down to Florida. She just got home from a trip, and her mother may be dying. So she's about a month off from her 103rd birthday. So I think she's ready.
Hi, my name is Sally, and it's David's birthday too. He's not here. He has this cough he's had for 3 weeks, so he's not coming, so he doesn't, make a scene. But he's doing okay. He's getting better. But I have another friend who's turning 98, Viney Burroughs, who is an African-American actress and played with so many people in the movies and on Broadway. And it's her 98th birthday today. So people are moving up.
Thanks, Randy and Sally.
Hi, I'm Ruth, and I have a sorrow, and that is that my younger grandson Fisher is in the hospital now with a second attack of pneumothorax. He's in Ohio, in college in Ohio, and his mom had to drive up from New Mexico to be with him and is hopefully going to be able to drive him home. She's going to have to be up there for a while. This is the younger brother of William. And William is my other grandson who's been so ill. So, between these two boys, it's just, we don't know what's going on, but it's really distressing. So, yeah, just wanted to share.
Thank you, Ruth. So sorry to hear. Anybody else? So, been anything in the chat?
Kate says, my 11-year-old grandson is in the ER with 103.6 temperature. Kate, please keep him in your thoughts.
Would anybody else, either online or in person, like to share? Oh, Kevin. Thank you for sharing your joys and sorrows with us and for those held silently in your hearts.
May we join together in a moment of silent meditation. Amen. That hymn that we sang, Precious Lord, written by Thomas Dorsey. Thomas Dorsey is known as the father of the gospel blues. He started out as a blues musician down in Florida and ended up in Chicago along with, as part of the Great Migration, where he got religion and thought he'd start wanting to be a church musician rather than a blues musician, working on Sunday morning rather than Saturday night. But because he was a blues guy, the black church was not too receptive of that. The blues is for Saturday night. And so it wasn't very successful. But then his wife died. And his response to his wife's death was, Precious Lord. And they could not deny that song. Thoughts of a Convict by Louis Verduzco. Someday the gates will open and once more I'll be free. A fact that makes me wonder what will become of me. Have I a future awaiting me, such as the past I've known? Will I be accepted by others or forced to walk alone? Are there such opportunities of employment for a man as I? Or will I have to sell dope again in order to get by? What of the friends that I once knew but haven't seen in years? Will they accept my friendship now without any doubts or fears? What is there waiting for me when I get out of that gate? Is there yet a chance for me, or is it now too late?
So now is the time in our service when we'll take an offering. We know it's the gifts of all of us that help support our ability to meet and thrive together. For those attending in person, we'll be passing around the collection plate. For those online, links and instructions will be posted in the chat. You can mail us a check or donate through the PayPal giving page on our website. Please give as generously as you can. And our offerings will be greatly received. But while they're received, before the offertory music, Carolyn is going to tell us a little bit about the music from Leadbelly that we've heard and will be hearing throughout the service.
So a long time ago, back in the Great Depression, 1930s, the federal government for the first time supported arts and culture. So John A. Lomax and his son Alan got a grant to go around in the South and collect folk songs from people. One of the places they went was, I guess it was Angola. Darrell, tell me if I'm wrong. Angola prison in Louisiana, where they found this guy that was just a fountain of songs. He knew songs. He wrote songs. It was like their dream come true. And so they befriended him and visited him, a number of times, finally making a recording of his songs and taking him to the governor of Louisiana, who let him out of prison. He's the only guy that ever sang his way out of prison. And many of the songs he wrote, like The House of the Rising Sun that we did this morning, became way famous, more famous than Leadbelly ever did. What was I going to tell you? When I was looking for just the right words to his songs last night. I was looking for the original words, not the ones that people had copied afterwards. Finally, I found something that said every time Leadbelly sang a song, he sang it differently. So I kind of just, okay, fine, I'll do what I can. But he traveled with John Lomax after he got out of prison for a long time. Ended up in New York. He and John had a falling out. But he became famous on his own and only went to prison like about one more time after that. And passed away 1949 of Lou Gehrig's disease.
Find your sheet with the midnight special on the back of House of the Rising Sun. You're invited to sing along.
part of the reasons that the Lomaxes got into Leadbelly so much is he knew about 10 million songs, and he knew folk, he knew gospel, he knew the whole thing, and he just knew music. And when he was first signed to a record contract, the record contract would only release his blues songs because he was a black man, and black men only sang the blues, you know? And so he was never that popular in terms of music. But what he ended up doing for a long time, as you mentioned, is he toured college campuses with John Lomax. And Lomax would give his lectures, and then here's an authentic blues man, right? And so Honey Ledbury, did concerts at Bryn Mawr. You know, he also had a photo article on him in Life magazine in 1937. And here's what the headline was: "Bad N-word makes good minstrel." That was how. Yeah. That was how Leadbelly was introduced to the American public in 1937. He was never that popular, but what he ended up doing, he would tour college campuses because he knew more how to talk to Bryn Mawr and Swarthmore than he did the people on the radio and the average white folks. And he actually had a radio show in New York. Guess where he had the radio show? WNYC. Right? And then, you know, with Lives of Bluesmen, it's so ironic. It goes beyond irony, because, as you say, he got Lou Gehrig's disease and died in 1949. And in 1951, the number one song in the country was "Goodnight, Irene," done by the Weavers and Pete Seeger. So that's. And that was the song that got him. Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah. So he always said, I got out for good behavior, you know, and I'm saying, well, probably a little bit of both, because if he hadn't had good behavior, it wouldn't have mattered how well he could sing, because he'd been singing well for a long time. So, well, anyhow, and change of pace a little bit. Let's join us in hymn number 205, Amazing Grace.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound, my Savior wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found, was blind, but now I see. Was grace that brought my heart to bear, and grace my fears relieved. How precious did that grace appear, beyond my first belief. Through many dangers, toils, and snares, I have already gone. His grace that brought me safe thus far, and grace will lead me home. When we've been there 10,000 years, bright shining as the sun, we know let's gaze to sing God's praise, and then we
Please be seated. The recognition and celebration of Thanksgiving has changed a lot in Unitarian Universalist churches during the 40 plus years that I've been preaching. You may recall a few weeks ago, I spoke about how history has turning points, that vast numbers of people and all of civilization is influenced by very small acts that happen, if not at random, then at least not terribly predictably. And I think one such act is the fact that the Pilgrims actually landed on Plymouth Rock. Have you ever seen the Mayflower? I think the Mayflower could fit inside this room, literally. I wouldn't sail to Manhattan on the Mayflower. And yet they made it across. And then when they got there, they basically said, well, it looks like we're going to starve. Except they didn't. And the reason they didn't starve really was because of one guy named Squanto. Because when he greeted these people who didn't even know anything about corn, he could speak English. They arrived in this new world and ran into probably one of two people in the whole continent that could speak English. It wasn't up in Canada. What are the chances of that? It's ridiculous. Now, why did he speak English? Because he was captured and sold into slavery and had ended up in England and in Spain and back and forth. And he finally brought his freedom and came back to his land and to his tribe. And what a great act of compassion that when he saw, he must have, oh no, more of these people. Holy, oh boy. He saved them. That's what he did. You want to talk about amazing grace. And so in honor of the prisoner, Squanto, who was more than a prisoner, I'd like to talk about some of the prisoners I've known over the years. For me, it goes back to 1968 when I was a music snob of the highest order, but really liked three albums that called my taste into question. One was Sweetheart of the Rodeo by the Byrds, because it was a real country album and not a make-believe country album. Music from Big Pink by the band. And don't let people say that when that came out, that was a big hit. People didn't know what to make of that. And the third was Johnny Cash's Live at Folsom Prison. Now, part of the reason I liked Live at Folsom Prison was also how I naturally liked Sweetheart of the Rodeo and music from Big Pink. They were all sort of in the same bag for me. Because I grew up in dive bars on the shore of Lake Erie and Toledo with longshoremen and Teamsters and factory workers like my dad. And Johnny Cash ruled the jukebox. And so I got to know Johnny Cash from an early age. And then when I grew up to have a deep voice and sing slightly off key, naturally, I adored Johnny Cash. So when I heard Live at Folsom Prison, the first cut on that is Folsom Prison. If you see that train coming, it's a prison song to the prison population. And if you've ever heard that album, you know, he gets to the line, I shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. And there's a big outpouring of applause and cheers, right? Okay, let me tell you something if you don't know. That applause and cheers was added in the studio afterwards. It did not take place live. The prisoners did not cheer a man who was killed just to be seen die. That didn't happen. That was the producer's idea of what prisoners would react, and they did not do that. Not only that, they really watched themselves because they knew that if they cheered the wrong parts that the guards didn't like, they'd hear about it in many ways later. They were really watching their P's and Q's. So that's another way that you can lie in the sound booth. Okay. But that album made me see that prisoners were human beings, were men, they had a good time, and they could be talked to and they could relate because the relationship between Johnny Cash and the prisoners was so palpable and so real. And by the time that album had been recorded, he'd been doing prison concerts for years. Earlier this year, I mentioned that Merle Haggard's career was inspired in San Quentin when he saw Johnny Cash. So fast forward about 5 years from that, I was finishing divinity school. And in order to do that, you have to do something called CPE, clinical pastoral education. It's like being an internship with actual real people where you get out of the classroom. Oftentimes people do it at hospitals or at police stations or, places where people are in extremis. So the person training for the ministry gets a real idea of life and some experience in how to react to that. And so me being who I was and am, I decided to do mine in the Tennessee State Mental Hospital. And I had 3 units that I visited regularly. One was an adolescent unit, one was a chronic unit, and one was the prison drug rehabilitation unit. What that was, it was a room, probably a quarter as big as the sanctuary. It was kind of like a rec room. It had comfy chairs, it had television, had a stereo and records, it had books and so forth. And the men basically hung out there when they weren't, and then there was sort of a barracks-like place for them to sleep. And what I would do is I would go there and I would sit and talk with the men and listen to music and so forth. And Johnny Cash taught me not to be afraid, but he didn't tell me specifically what to say either. And so I didn't quite know what to do. So I just was there and let things develop. And it turned out that they were just guys. And a lot of, I was 23 at the time. And a lot of them were about that age or just a few years older. And what you would do is if you were arrested and going to prison and were addicted to drugs, you would go to this drug rehabilitation unit for usually about 6 weeks until you had kicked the habit, and then you go to prison. The other population were men who had relapsed into a drug addiction while they were in prison. And then they would go for 6 weeks there in rehab. So my first thought was, you mean you can actually get addicted to drugs while you're in prison? Oh, yeah. I didn't know that. That was not covered in the rest of my curriculum in divinity school. Okay. And what I found too, especially as some of the older guys, they could modulate their drug addiction real well because 6 weeks in that rehab was like, 6 weeks in Boca, that they would get an addiction in order to go to drug rehab and then go back. And what I found out was that so much of ministry, so much of being a human being is just showing up and listening. I was amazed at that. I didn't really need to know anything else, but having, frankly, the courage to sit in that chair and show up was the hardest thing. And once you were there, it was just listening to people. So I encourage you, if you want to be ministers, just show up. Just show up. One guy I made particular friends with is one of the few white guys, and I'm terribly embarrassed that I cannot remember. His name was Art. His name was Art. I've been trying to think of his name all week. Yay! His name was Art. And we hit it off even better. And so when it was time for him to go to prison, he put me on his visitation list. So I would go to the Tennessee State Prison and visit him. If you can imagine the British Parliament with the Pentagon on either side, that's what the architecture of the Tennessee State Prison looks like. And so I would go to visit him. And of course, it's just like the TV shows. You sit down and there's the glass and the phone and everything. And that's what you do. And we would visit. And then after a while, I couldn't visit him anymore. He was put into solitary. I forget what for. He was put into solitary. And let me tell you, solitary confinement under any circumstances should be abolished right now, today. It's cruel and unusual punishment, period, end. Thanks. But he was there, so I couldn't visit him for a while. And the next thing I know, he was out. I said, whoa. Okay, what happened? How did you get out? He said, I ate the light bulb. I said, what do you mean? I thought that was some sort of prison term for God knows what, you know. It turns out ate the light bulb means he ate the light bulb. The only thing that was in there was the bare light bulb, and he ate the light bulb. He said, how did you do that without killing yourself? He said, I chewed it really fine. Well, he said, well, yeah, of course that's what you did. You know, but that was the thing. That was the known thing. If you wanted to get out of solitary, if he ate the light bulb, you know, they'd have to, you know, if you didn't die of internal bleeding, you know, they would pump your stomach or whatever. But that would mean that you were so desperate or so crazy that they let you out of solitary. And but if you didn't have the courage to eat the light bulb, well, maybe you didn't need to get out of solitary. Okay. Yeah, really. My first church was in rural Eastern North Carolina. And in the county, Sampson County, there was a division of the North Carolina State Prison because it was a poor rural county. And that's where they put prisons, is in poor rural counties. And then, by the way, as you may know, they count the prison population in that poor rural county rather than in the cities where all the convicts come from. So, you know, in addition to gerrymandering, there's also that. So there was a prison there, and it was called the gun camp because it had guns. It had submachine guns mounted on the four corners of the place, and it was razor wire all around it. Really forbidding place. But when I went in there, I taught college courses. I taught philosophy 101 and human relations, and the guys got college courses because back in the 70s, you could do that. And now you can't because prisons are starting to be privatized, and it's far worse to be in prison now than it was 50 years ago. Period. No argument there. So when you talk about privatization of prisons and maximizing the profit, safety in our society would be better served if when a person went through a door that said prison, on the other side was freedom and they got out. Society would be better served by the prison population not doing any time than doing the time they do and being affected the way prisoners are affected in prison. It's a negative to society and it's a negative to the people. All the guys that I taught in North Carolina were about my age. I mean, all of them, 100%. And they had to be in for pretty big crimes to be in that gun camp. Were Vietnam vets who had drug problems. And as soon as they got back to the United States, they shot somebody. Because what did Vietnam teach them? How to shoot drugs and how to shoot guns. And they ended up in my relations class. And what did I teach? I taught Soul on Ice and the autobiography of Malcolm X. Thank you very much. That was interesting for everybody. I also played some basketball with him, and it was the best mannered basketball game I was ever in, because if there was any contratemps, the guys just took away the ball and that was the end of the game. And I remember I had a friend who was often was at the commissary, where he would sell other inmates candy and donuts and coffee and cigarettes and so forth. And he had a very nice ballpoint pen. And then he didn't. And I said, what happened to your pen? It broke or something like that. He was really crestfallen. And so I went out and got him a really nice ballpoint pen. You know, it might have cost me $8 or $9 back then, you know, and I gave it to him. And you might have thought I'd given him a Corvette. He was so sincerely grateful for that pen. Then I moved to suburban, affluent Boston and didn't make a prison visit for 11 years because there was zero interest in prison ministries in suburban, affluent counties. And the nearest prison was in central Massachusetts or western Massachusetts. And there was zero interest in Unitarian Universalism in prison ministries. And as far as I know, there still is very little interest. I remember one time I happened to be at the Universalist Church in Joliet, Illinois. And as you may know, Joliet, Illinois is the place of the Illinois State Prison. There was, oh man, that's Sacco and Vanzetti was there. All the gangsters from Chicago during Prohibition came down there. It was a bad place. And at the Universalist Church in the foyer, they had a map of the area with little push pins where all the members lived, right? And there was a push pin in Joliet prison. And I said, oh, do you have a member who's in prison? And I said, oh, I don't know. That was just one of the kids making the joke. Oh, no. And they were really wanting to deny, God forbid, they would have a member of their church who was in prison. And I thought that, wow, this is really cool. They have a prison ministry, and they didn't see it that way at all. And that's my experience in Unitarian Universalist period, everywhere and always, which is why I've gone here 43 years. First time I've talked about these visits. First time I've ever talked. Now that's as much my shortcoming as Unitarian Universalism. And maybe that's changed. I don't know. But when I was up in Boston, starting in the 70s and the 80s, homelessness became a problem, right? Homelessness. You know what homelessness is? There's not a homelessness problem in this country. There's an incarceration problem. There's a drug problem. There's a mental health problem. And that's why there's a homeless problem. And attacking a homeless problem without attacking those other things is really pouring your time and good heart down a rat hole. Then I moved to Manhattan. Now, everybody knocks on your door when you're in Manhattan. And I was on Central Park West and 76th Street. Michael Douglas and Bill Moyers lived next door. And I used to see Tony Randall and his wife outside all the time. It was that neighborhood, it was fun. But there were also a lot of people looking for a handout. And I had a discretionary fund there too. And boy, my discretionary fund was really discreet when I was there because so many people knocked on the door, and I developed a policy. I said, I'll listen to any story once. And I gave him $20, but don't come back with the same story twice. And I stuck by this. And some people only came back once, but other people, they were like Dickens. They had a different chapter every week. And they didn't lie. Though they had their own perspective on things. Let's put it that way. And some of them I then visited when they were incarcerated, because being incarcerated was part of that lifestyle. It was just, And I had no idea how many people have incarceration as part of their lifestyle and an indelible part of their family. Now, you can raise your hands a little bit. Anybody here ever been to the Tombs? Anybody here ever been to Rikers Island? Okay. The Tombs is sort of the jail of Manhattan. And it's Edgar Allan Poe's city. It's dank and it's dark, and you expect to see rats and skulls, and you don't, but you might as well. And it's really claustrophobic because it's underground. Oh my God, it's about the worst place I've ever been, except Rikers Island, which is worse. Rikers Island should be burned to the ground tomorrow. Under any circumstance. I can't believe that it's still open. Okay, the only thing that makes me understand why it's still open is, remember that the Illinois State Prison in Joliet? That was supposed to be closed down in 1902. And they built another prison next to it. And both of them stayed open for the next 100 years. And I think it was demolished in like early 2002. So these things abide and stay around like persistent viruses. Rikers Island at one time was the world's largest purchaser of razor wire. And I've gone into a lot of prisons. I never felt more dehumanized than when I went through the security at Rikers Island. Oh my God. And that was one place, though. When I was in New York, I ran into a fella who was in my building. We used to walk our dogs together. He was a lawyer. And I was talking about that one time. He said, I'm a member of the Correctional Association. The Correctional Association. What's that? That is a non-for-profit lobbying group on behalf of prisoners' rights. And it's, as far as I know, the only place that has the imprimatur of the New York State government to make visits into prisons and to make sure that prisons are keeping up with the policies. Really good organization. So I got involved with it a little bit, got the church involved finally on that. And that was very, very good relationship between the church and the Correctional Association. And one of the things I did one time was I went on a fact-finding tour between Rikers and the court in New York. Because what happens if you're at Rikers and you have to make a court appearance, you get on the bus at about 5 a.m. and go to the main holding pen in the prison of the big City Hall building. And there they divide the people into the 5 boroughs. There's 5 holding pens, and then they go out to their local court. And you know what a court appearance is. They come in, you come up, Darrell, Berger, here's your case. You stand in front and says, your case is brought forward for 6 months. Come back in 6 months. Boom. So a lot of these guys, their court appearance is literally a minute. And for that, they get up at 5 a.m. and they don't get back until about 8 o'clock at night. And so what the Correctional Association was trying to do then is say, could you tighten your schedule a little bit? So like, if you're going to have your court appointment, could you at least say it's going to be morning, midday, or afternoon? So maybe not everybody has to leave Rikers Island at 5 a.m. And that's what they did. So for all the efforts that we did, at least back then, it was probably still going on. If you have a court appearance, you'll know roughly what time it is. So maybe you don't have to get on that bus until noon. So maybe you only have to spend 4 or 5 hours for that 5 minutes rather than 12 or 14 hours. That's prison reform work. And I remember there were 165 men going to court that day. Any guess on how many of them were white? 2. I feel in my heart that white America has no idea the rate of incarcerations of non-white people. And if they did, they would vomit endlessly. I really believe that. And the only reason we don't know is we don't want to know. There was one woman that I met. Her name was Lisa. She came to the door when she was pregnant. And she gave birth in Bedford's Hills, the women's facility up in Westchester. She was a drug mule. I think the saddest room I've ever been in my life is the nursery at a woman's prison. I saw her years later on the subway. She was very drugged out. And she didn't recognize me, and I didn't make any movement toward her. And I turned away. I wish I had found the Correctional Association 25 years ago. Now, churches have as one of their main goals, almost any church does, charity. Charity is an excellent thing to do. There needs to be more charity in the world. Project Hospitality is a charitable project, and it's very, very laudable. This building is not very well suited for that kind of charity. We've tried for years and years, and we've done a lot of good, but we really reached a lot of institutional limits too. And what I'm saying is, there's justice to be done. The more justice in the world, the less the need of charity. And how to get those homeless people out of shelters and into homes, one of the most important things to do is keep them out of jail. Not all of them, but boy, a lot of them, a lot of them, a lot of them. And if Black lives matter, prisoners' lives matter. And you guys don't even know what I left out. Let's join in our closing hymn, number 210. I had no empathy, no singular vision, no moment of truth, but a steady accumulation of 1,000 slights, 1,000 indignities, and 1,000 unremembered moments produced in me an anger, a rebelliousness, a desire to fight the system that imprisoned my people. There was no particular day on which I said, henceforth, I will devote myself to the liberation of my people. Instead, I simply found myself doing so, for I could not do otherwise.
Well, either way, I guess I'll extinguish the chalice first, but thanks, Darrell. I invite you to join me in extinguishing our chalice. You can find the affirmation in our order of service. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. For these we carry in our hearts until we are together again.
I think that was the longest sermon I've ever preached. I think 27 minutes.
Great one, though. All right, now we're done.
Oh, it's my Ed McMahon over here. Thanks very much. That's good. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay. Good Night, Irene, the famous Lead Belly song. Listen to the Weaver's version. It's very sanitized.